PIF is driving transformation at a scale never seen before, sparking a new era of economic growth and opportunity. It's working to overcome barriers, challenge the status quo, and catalyze change. I'm Kimberley Leonard from the PIF News Network, and in this episode, we're talking to the head of PIF's National Development Division, Jerry Todd. Jerry, thank you so much for talking to us. I think we should begin with, what does PIF do? What is it? Because its mandate does seem to be fairly different from your traditional sovereign wealth fund.
So to understand PIF, we first need to understand Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is a diversification strategy for the country. PIF has a dual mandate. We invest for financial return, and we invest to help advance the economic diversification of Saudi Arabia. Many of the sectors we're building, particularly on the industrial side, are new for the kingdom. So there are no companies. The starting point is no players in that sector. So in those sectors, PIF's role is to stand up some of the key components of those value chains. For example, in sectors like automotive, we'll set up the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, at the end of the value chain, and then their job is to bring supply chains in over time.
Let's talk about the National Development Division, NDD. You're head of that division. That doesn't strike me as something traditional sovereign wealth funds have.
So there are a number of dual mandate investment organizations around the world. These are investors typically linked either to a part of a country or at the national level that both invest to deliver economic impact and financial returns. They each have a different kind of model for how they do that. There's no one right way to do this. But there are not many countries that have something like Vision 2030, where the amount of capital that's being mobilized and the ambition level in terms of what's happening at the country level matches what we're doing here. And so His Royal Highness, in his capacity as chairman of PIF, mandated that we set up as PIF a division that's focused on making sure that all these different components that are happening are driving towards the ultimate goal, which is that we build out, in the case of PIF, these 13 priority sectors at scale. And so that mandate is cross-PIF, cross-sectoral. It's also across time, right? So in many cases, we're solving for laying foundations for benefits that will be reaped over the next 50 years. And so it allows us to be very strategic on the one hand and think in a holistic and integrated way. But on the other hand, we have a great sense of urgency to lay the seeds for the impact today so that the benefits start to accrue to the economy as quickly as possible.
It sounds like it's such a specific remit on the one hand, but then such a broad remit on the other hand. How does NDD decide what it's going to do?
It is both broad and specific. So in general, there's four things we're very focused on. The first is making sure that the private sector in Saudi is engaged as suppliers, as investors, and as operators. And the second is driving local content and deep local supply chains over time. The third is ensuring that the ecosystems are healthy in the new sectors that we're building so that private capital will flow into those sectors and find attractive returns. And then the fourth is making sure that as PIF, we leverage our scale, we operate in a coordinated manner, and we capitalize as best we can on this opportunity. And so to deliver on these four, because the portfolio is very broad, some are startups, some are mature companies, we need to design things in a way that they meet the needs of that variety of situations, but also we need to deliver things in a scalable way. And so we do that by developing what we call programs, platforms, and tools, PPT. So we design these programs to solve some problem, and then we roll them out. And we have 16 of these that are live, that are operating, that are being used by different companies in the portfolio today. And each of these is designed either to be used across all of PIF or to be used by companies in a specific sector. And so if you look at the largest 20 companies in the PIF portfolio, the ones that have the largest OPEX and CAPEX going forward, or that play critical roles in new sectors, on average, each one is using about 4 of these PPT. And as the impact gets proven, the adoption grows. So on the local content front, PIF has a local content program called Musahama. We have a target at the PIF level. We're meant to hit 60% local content. And this filters down both as targets and as a policy to the portfolio companies. They each have their own set of targets that they align with their board, and they create their own policy. And then they create a program, which is how they deliver on that target while complying with that policy.
You mentioned it, but what are the short-term local content goals?
So PIF has a 60% target, as we said, by end of 2025. There's a bit of a lag in reporting because we use audited financials. So for the end of 2023, which was last calendar and fiscal year, our score at the PIF level was 52.5.
NDD itself, the division, has stringent reporting frameworks, doesn't it? I mean, it has to be accountable for how much of what it said would end up in the local economy has actually ended up in the local economy.
So we do the reporting following the guidelines of the local content authority in Saudi. And so this is an authority that tackles this topic at the government level. We report using those guidelines. Our companies report using those guidelines, and all that information rolls up into them. And so we very much, comply with their requirements, and that also forms part of the reporting framework for PIF as a VRP, a Vision 2030. So that information, as well as a lot of other information, gets reported on a quarterly basis into the center of government, which is then keeping track of how overall Vision 2030 progress is being made across all the different VRPs and all the different entities that play a role.
VRP?
Vision Realization Program.
Which is part of Vision 2030,
Yes,
right?
so Vision 2030 is both it's many things. It's an aspiration, it's a strategy, and it's a governance framework for how to mobilize the assignments that have been given to different entities that are each playing a part in delivering that.
Let's talk about the different sectors, because it's so fascinating. How does NDD determine if a new sector should be developed?
So the short answer is the planning process and the strategy setting process at the Vision 2030 level, and then when PIF identified the 13 sectors. And so we are focused on that 13. Now, these 13 sectors are broadly classified. And so within them, there are subsectors. And the amount of time and care we give to any one subsector is a function of the opportunity for economic impact and the opportunity for financial return. And so PIF, balances those two when it's making decisions on where to invest. But in general, what you want is concentrated investments in one area rather than spreading things around, because you're trying to reach critical mass in a subsector so that you get that escape velocity that we're talking about earlier. So multiple investments in one area leapfrog a sector much faster than if you kind of spread those bets around.
Are there any NDD success stories, PIF success stories that you could talk to us about?
Many success stories. I think the automotive sector is interesting at different levels. It's interesting because it's new. So many different, very important players in the ecosystem all came together to make this happen. So, PIF has set up one OEM, invested internationally in another, and then attracted a third, which is Hyundai. Now you would think to yourself, why do multiple? Why not just do one? But the point of having a thriving sector is that there will be competition, and that's fine. That's normal. You need that healthy, competitive dynamic to keep everyone kind of innovating and driving for more efficiency. So we have the OEMs. We've set up the financing arms to attract supply chain partners in. Some of that we've done directly, like Pirelli, as we mentioned earlier. Some we've done through Tosaru. On the talent side, we launched in partnership with Lucid and Sear, NAVA, which is the National Automotive Vehicles Academy. The inaugural class started in October. That academy was developed very close partnership with Lucid and Sear. The jobs that are being trained are jobs they need. Those are roles they have to fill.
And NDD, in the division there is a department specifically, it's National Workforce, isn't it, that looks at these are the jobs that we need to fill, how are we going to do that?
Yes. So the Workforce Development Department is focused squarely on this issue. So NAVA was effectively a mechanism for Lucid and Sear to tap into local talent in a sector where there were no skilling academies present, because it's a new sector.
I think we have to draw a picture of what the automotive sector was and what it is now in terms of what has happened, because it was just spare parts and services. Small service shops, right?
Yeah, you can look at it that way. I look at it as opportunity cost. So the automotive sector is essentially a way to build national capabilities in advanced manufacturing. So it's a vector for advanced manufacturing. In terms of GDP multiplier, it's a 5x multiplier. So because you have deep local supply chains, in automotive, generally speaking, it creates a lot of economic activity. It has a 7.5x job multiplier. So it creates, every dollar invested creates a lot of kind of employment. And it's R&D intensive. So it has the fourth highest R&D intensity of any sector globally at about 5%. The reason I said I look at it as opportunity cost is because there's always been demand. It's a sector that's very attractive domestically, both in terms of the economic multiplier, but also the skills that you build, which prepares you to enter new sectors over time. And historically, all we had were, repair shops and basic sales and service. And so building out that sector isn't just about those companies, and isn't just about today. It's really about creating the advanced manufacturing capabilities in country for the future.
A lot of what NDD does sounds to me like it's building relationships, seeing the opportunity and connecting the right people with the other right people.
I would think of us as a strategic enabler. So a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the investment divisions and by the management teams of these companies, right? They're the ones who have to stand up and build these businesses. And what they're doing is very hard. And so wherever we can make it a bit easier by proactively developing a solution or fixing something in the ecosystem in order to help them be more successful, or wherever we can capture learnings from different sectors so that we're getting the benefits of our scale, we look to do that.
How does NDD work with the private sector?
In a way, our entire job as PIF is to make the private sector successful. Because the scale of what's happening and the opportunity that it represents are such that we can't do this without the private sector. So, Vision 2030 is a great national project, but it requires global capital, whether that's human, intellectual, or financial, in order to deliver. So we need the world to get very excited about what's happening here. At some level, everything we're trying to do is around de-risking something to the point where private sector capital from around the world sees an opportunity and comes in on its own. When that starts to happen, we will have kind of reached escape velocity in these new sectors. And so in order for that to happen, the private sector has to be aware of what's happening. They have to believe that it's happening. And so setting up large, well-capitalized OEMs is an important part of creating that credibility. And then they need the tips, right? So they need, they need to be able to access talent. They need the right infrastructure. They need enabling policy. And they need the supply chain downstream and upstream from them to be there so they can slot in.
And NDD has two platforms for that engagement, doesn't it? What are they and how do they work?
So we have the Private Sector Forum, which is in February 12th and 13th.
Here in Riyadh.
Here in Riyadh. And then we have the Private Sector Hub, which is essentially a part of our PIF corporate website, where potential investors can go and learn about investment opportunities that are being created by PIF.
So that's pif.gov.sa. I had a look at it earlier. It's on the right of the website, on the right of the menu. You go down, the Private Sector Hub is there, and that lists the opportunities.
Yes, so there's two categories of opportunities. There are investment opportunities listed by the portfolio companies. So I think 14 of our portfolio companies have a total of 83 investment opportunities. So these are things they need done. Either someone needs a hotel built and operated, someone needs staff housing built, they need power generation, or there's some good or service that's part of their supply chains that they need. And then, so that's, I think there's 80 something of those. And then there's a similar amount that were not put on by the portfolio companies themselves, but were put on by NDD. So these are goods or services that are broadly required. And so there's an opportunity for people to come in and invest in providing those goods and services to meet the needs of multiple portfolio companies.
So check out the Private Sector Hub, I'd say.
Yes, and I think roughly every month there's, kind of 5% of the opportunities change. So there's always new opportunities there.
Let's go back to the Private Sector Forum because it is going to be different this year, isn't it? Just give us an example. Just give us a taster of how it's going to be different.
So I'll tell you what's different from last year. So last year we had demand signaling sessions. So this is explaining what's happening kind of in terms of opportunity for suppliers in the different sectors that are being built. We're turning those discussions into tracks. So there'll be places and times throughout the 2 days where everyone who's interested in an opportunity will come together and there'll be a series of discussions. Some of these will be led by PIF. Some of these will be led by the portfolio company. Some of these will be led by industry experts. So someone can go spend 3 or 4 hours. Let's say you're a contractor. Over the course of 3 or 4 hours, you can learn about demand. You'll get presentations from different PIF companies in terms of what their building plans look like, timing, the nature of what's being constructed, requirements, etc. And then without ever leaving your seat, you'll then hear about a number of different programs that have been set up to enable contractors, both in terms of getting access to information and pre-qualification platforms, and upskilling workshops, but also different parts of the financing ecosystem that are making changes in order to make it easier for contractors to secure the financing they need. So these tracks are a great way to add more value to the guests that are coming. And I think we have 6 or 7 tracks set up: contracting, manufacturing and goods and services, Something new this year is there'll be a track for interested investors. So investors, both financial and strategic, that are looking to find opportunities to invest in what's happening, we'll have a dedicated track for them. What are the opportunities? Who do they talk to learn more about? And what are some of the enablers that are being put in place to help them be successful?
Jerry, let's talk about the future. Let's say 10 years from now. How would you measure if NDD and the work that you've done has been a success?
So deep, local, tech-enabled supply chains serving competitive industry. And that is the essence of what Vision 2030 is trying to do. So progress against that means that we reach a point where international and local companies jump into those opportunities. And so that's, I think, the first marker of success. For me personally, we've built an incredible team in NDD and at PIF. And I fully expect the people I work with to be playing very important roles in shaping the economy as it goes forward. Some of those will still be within NDD. Some of them will be in other parts of the ecosystem, but I'm very excited about that as well.
Jerry, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kimberly.
And to you, wherever you're watching from, wherever you're listening from, thank you so much. I'm Kimberley Leonard, and I'll see you next time.